The massive alien ship appeared at the edge of our solar system without warning. It was huge, bigger than anything humans had ever built, and it moved through space like it owned everything around it. The ship had smooth, curved surfaces that seemed to glow with their own light, making it look like something from a dream or nightmare. Inside the alien vessel, Captain Vexithan sat in his command chair, looking at holographic displays showing information about Earth. His face showed clear disgust as he read through the data. To him, humans were just another primitive species that needed to be put in their place. His long, thin fingers tapped impatiently on the armrest, while his aide, Commander Kelmori, prepared the usual documents they used when dealing with new species. "Another backwater planet with delusions of importance," Vexthan muttered, his voice carrying the kind of annoyance someone might have when dealing with insects. "Look at their technology levels. They still use chemical rockets and metal bullets. How pathetic." Meanwhile, on Earth's largest space station, Ambassador Kim Tai-ho was getting ready for the most important meeting in human history. He stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his formal black diplomatic uniform one last time. His hands were steady, but there was tension in his shoulders that showed just how much pressure he was under. Park So-min, his trusted aide and intelligence specialist, approached him quietly. She was a small woman with sharp eyes, who had spent years studying alien species and their behavior patterns. She had been preparing for this moment longer than almost anyone else on Earth. "The final briefing just came in," she whispered into his earpiece, making sure no one else could hear. "Our intelligence shows they've done this exact same routine with 47 other species across the galaxy. Every single time, it's the same pattern. They make contact. They insult the species. Then they demand complete surrender. If the species refuses, they bring in their military and force submission." Kim Tai-ho nodded slightly, his face remaining calm even though his mind was racing. He had studied the reports of other first contact situations. Some species had fought back and been destroyed. Others had submitted immediately and became servants. None had found a third option. "What about the species that cooperated?" he asked quietly. "They're still alive, but they're not really free," Park So-min replied. "They mine resources for the aliens, follow strict cultural rules, and their brightest people get taken away for research. It's slavery with fancy words." The formal ceremony began in the station's main docking bay, which had been converted into a meeting hall for the occasion. Cameras from around the world were broadcasting the event live. Billions of people watched as humanity prepared to meet another intelligent species for the first time. Kim Tai-ho walked forward with measured steps, carrying a golden plaque that contained messages of peace and friendship from Earth. Behind him walked a carefully chosen group of representatives from different countries and cultures, all wearing their finest formal clothes. "Greetings to our visitors from the stars," Kim Tai-ho began, his voice clear and respectful. "We welcome you to our solar system and offer our friendship. We hope this meeting will be the beginning of a peaceful relationship between our peoples." The translation took a few seconds to process through the alien technology. Then Captain Vexithan's response came back through the speakers, and his words hit like a slap in the face. "How quaint that you believe your kind capable of meaningful contribution to civilized space," the alien captain said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your crude fusion drives and kinetic projectiles suggest a species barely beyond throwing rocks. We have seen thousands of species like yours. You are children playing with dangerous toys." The silence that followed was deafening. Every human in the room felt the insult like a physical blow. This wasn't just casual rudeness. It was deliberate humiliation designed to break their spirit before negotiations even began. Kim Tai-ho's diplomatic training kicked in. He kept his polite smile in place, but everyone who knew him could see the anger flashing briefly in his eyes. In the observation deck above, Admiral Lee Dong-wook's hands clenched into fists, his military instincts screaming at him to respond to the threat. The alien captain continued his speech, each word calculated, to wound human pride and establish dominance. This was how the Confederation had conquered dozens of worlds, not just with superior weapons, but by crushing the spirit of resistance before it could even begin. But as Kim Tai-ho stood there, maintaining his diplomatic composure, something Else was happening behind his calm exterior. The seeds of humanity's response were already being planted. 3 weeks after that humiliating first meeting, Kim Tae-ho found himself standing in the most impressive structure he had ever seen. The POW. Confederation's Grand Assembly was a massive crystalline dome that seemed to be carved from a single giant jewel. Light filtered through the walls in rainbow patterns, creating an almost magical atmosphere that was designed to inspire awe and submission in visiting species. The scale of the place was overwhelming. The amphitheater could hold thousands of beings, and today it was packed with representatives from 200 different alien species. Some looked almost human, while others were so strange that Kim Tae-ho had trouble understanding how they even moved or communicated. There were floating jellyfish-like creatures, insect beings with multiple arms, and reptilian species with scales that changed color as they moved. But what struck Kim Tae-ho most wasn't the diversity of the species, it was how they were arranged. The seating wasn't random. It was a carefully designed hierarchy that told the story of galactic power in crystal-clear terms. At the very center of the amphitheater, on raised platforms that literally looked down on everyone else, sat the most advanced species. These were the ones who had been part of the Confederation the longest, who controlled the most territory, who had the most powerful weapons. They wore elaborate robes and sat on throne-like chairs that seemed to be made of some kind of energy, rather than solid matter. Moving outward from the center, each ring of seating held species with slightly less status. The second ring held military allies and major resource providers. The third ring held stable, established members who followed orders without question. Each ring got progressively lower, so that beings in the outer areas had to look up at those in the center. And at the very bottom, in the cheapest, most uncomfortable seating area, sat the newest members, the species that were still proving themselves worthy of basic respect. This is where humanity had been placed. Kim Tae-ho looked around at their fellow probationary members and felt a mix of anger and pity. There was a lizard-like species whose representatives looked exhausted and defeated. Next to them sat bird-like beings who kept their heads down and never made eye contact with anyone from the higher rings. These weren't proud civilizations. They were broken spirits who had learned to accept their place at the bottom. Administrator Yelgoth stood at the central podium, his voice amplified throughout the massive chamber. He was a tall, thin being, with gray skin and eyes that seemed to glow with their own light. When he spoke, his tone made it clear that he was used to being obeyed without question. "Today we welcome several new probationary members to our great confederation," he announced, gesturing toward the lowest seating area with obvious disdain. "These newcomers will observe our standard protocols. You will speak only when recognized by a superior member. You will contribute resources as assigned by the central authority. You will accept guidance without question or complaint." The words hit Kim Tae-ho like physical blows. This wasn't diplomacy. It was the reading of surrender terms to conquered peoples. He looked around the chamber and realized that every species here had gone through this same humiliation when they first joined. Despite his diplomatic training screaming at him to stay quiet, Kim Tae-ho couldn't help himself. He stood up slowly, his movement causing a ripple of attention throughout the massive amphitheater. "Administrator Yelgoth," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence, "I would like clarification on humanity's representation rights in this assembly. What is our path to equal participation in decision-making?" The reaction was immediate and devastating. The chamber erupted in what Kim Tae-ho's translator identified as laughter. But it wasn't the kind of laughter you hear at a comedy show. This was cruel, mocking laughter designed to shame and humiliate. Species from every level of the hierarchy joined in, creating a wall of sound that seemed to echo off the crystal walls forever. Administrator Yelgoth waited for the laughter to die down before responding, a thin smile on his lips that never reached his cold eyes. "Your kind will earn representation through centuries of proven service," he said, with the kind of patronizing patience usually reserved for explaining simple concepts to small children. "Until then, consider yourselves fortunate to witness true civilization in action. Many species never progress beyond their current status. Some find that permanent subordination suits their limited capabilities quite well. Beside Kim Tae-ho, Dr. Choi Min-ah sat perfectly still, but her pen moved constantly across her notepad. As Earth's leading expert in xenobiology and alien behavior, she was trained to notice things that others might miss. While everyone else focused on the administrator's words, she was watching the subtle body language of the alien species around them. What she saw made her blood run cold. The superior species weren't just displaying dominance. They were showing clear threat signals, postures that in Earth animals would indicate readiness to attack, color changes that suggested aggressive intent. The message was unmistakable: step out of line and face the consequences. The meeting continued for hours, with humanity forced to listen as their new overlords discussed resource quotas, cultural modification requirements, and population management policies. Every word made it clearer that joining the Confederation meant giving up everything that made humanity human. The official document arrived exactly 1 week after the humiliating assembly meeting. It came through diplomatic channels, delivered with all the formality of a wedding invitation, but everyone who read it knew they were looking at humanity's death warrant dressed up in polite language. General Nam Hyun-woo sat at the head of the emergency council table, the document projected on the wall behind him. His usually perfect military posture showed signs of strain as he read through each demand. The man had served in 3 different conflicts, had stared down enemy armies, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. "Let me break this down for everyone," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "First, they want 40% of all our mineral resources, not just the common stuff. They want our rare earth elements, our uranium, our platinum, basically everything we need to maintain our technology." The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Earth's resources weren't unlimited, and losing nearly half of them would cripple human civilization. Second, General Nam continued, complete technological oversight. That means every computer, every satellite, every piece of advanced equipment gets monitored by them. They'll have access to all our communications, all our research, all our military systems. Prime Minister Seo Jae-won rubbed his temples. They want to turn us into a surveillance state with themselves as the watchers. "It gets worse," General Nam said grimly. "Mandatory cultural modification programs. They want to change how we think, how we behave, what we believe. They've attached a list of human customs and traditions they consider problematic. Freedom of speech is on that list. So is democracy." The room fell into stunned silence. These weren't just economic demands. They were asking humanity to stop being human. But General Nam wasn't finished. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper as he read the final section. "And they want our brightest scientists transferred to their research facilities as living specimens of primitive ingenuity. They're not asking for cooperation or collaboration. They want to study our people like lab rats." Ambassador Kim Tae-ho had been sitting quietly, but now he spoke up. His diplomatic training helped him keep his voice steady, but everyone could hear the fury underneath his calm words. "They specifically mentioned Dr. Yoon Hye-jin by name," he said. "They called her work on quantum mechanics adorably ambitious for such a young species. They want to take the woman who revolutionized our understanding of physics and turn her into their pet project." The impact of those words hit the room like a physical blow. Dr. Yoon Hye-jin wasn't just any scientist. She was a national treasure. Her work had led to breakthroughs in energy production and space travel. She had 3 children and had spent her entire career trying to make life better for humanity. Defense Minister Park Jin-woo spoke up from across the table. "How many others are on their list?" 237 names, Kim Tae-ho replied. "Our best doctors, engineers, physicists, biologists. They want to strip away everyone who makes humanity competitive and turn them into research subjects." Prime Minister Seo Jae-won was the first to break the heavy silence that followed. "What's our timeline for response?" Kim Tae-ho's answer was swift and brutal. 72 hours. They made it very clear that delays would be interpreted as defiance. "Have they made direct threats?" asked General Nam, his military mind already calculating potential responses. Kim Tae-ho's expression grew even more grim. "They're too sophisticated. They'll have direct threats. They prefer what they call guidance through historical examples. They sent along a detailed report about the last species that took too long to comply with similar demands. He activated another screen, showing images that made several council members look away. The Kethnari civilization, they were located about 50 light-years from here, had a population of 8 billion across 4 planets. When they asked for more time to consider the Confederation's terms, they were given an additional week as a show of generous patience. The images on the screen showed barren worlds, empty, cities and scattered ruins. When that week was up and the Kethnari still hadn't agreed to all terms, the Confederation decided to make an example. 3 of their 4 worlds were completely sterilized. The 4th was left intact as a museum, a reminder to other species about the consequences of defiance. "What happened to the survivors?" asked Dr. Lee Min-jung, the Council's science advisor. "There weren't any survivors on the destroyed worlds," Kim Tae-ho replied quietly. "The remaining population on the 4th planet numbers about 50,000. They serve as caretakers for the museum and live under complete Confederation control. Their children are raised from birth to serve alien masters." The room fell silent, again as the full weight of humanity's situation became clear. This wasn't negotiation. It was a choice between slavery and extinction. "They call it the path of wisdom," Kim Tae-ho continued. "Submit completely and live as servants, or resist and be eliminated as a threat to galactic stability." "General," Nam's jaw tightened as he stared at the images of dead worlds. "How long do we have before they expect our final answer?" 68 hours and counting, Kim Tae-ho replied, glancing at his watch. "And they've positioned a battle fleet just outside our solar system to ensure we understand the seriousness of their deadline." The clock was ticking, and humanity faced the darkest choice in its history. On the surface, everything looked perfectly normal. Humanity had accepted the Confederation's demands with what appeared to be resigned compliance. The mineral shipments left Earth on schedule, loaded with 40% of the planet's most valuable resources. Cultural oversight programs began in major cities, with alien administrators setting up offices and monitoring stations. Human diplomats attended every required meeting and followed every protocol with meticulous precision. But if you looked closely, really closely, strange things were happening throughout human space. It started small. Research Station Omega-7, orbiting Jupiter's moons, went offline for what was reported as routine maintenance. The official logs showed standard equipment upgrades that required a temporary communication blackout. After 2 weeks, the station came back online, but something felt different. The research data being transmitted was technically correct, but oddly generic, lacking the innovative spark that had made human science so interesting to galactic observers. Colony. Ship New Horizon departed from Earth's orbital shipyard right on schedule. Destination officially listed as Kepler 442b, a planet earmarked for human settlement under Confederation oversight. The ship's tracking beacon functioned perfectly, sending regular updates about its journey through hyperspace. But when Confederation monitors tried to verify its arrival, they found something puzzling. The ship had somehow ended up at Kepler 438c instead, nearly 12 light-years off course. Administrator Park Kyung-soo, humanity's new liaison with the Confederation Oversight Committee, had an explanation ready. "Navigation error in the hyperspace calculations," he reported with embarrassed professionalism. "Our primitive computer systems still have reliability issues. We're working to improve our accuracy." The alien overseers accepted this explanation without question. After all, what did you expect from a species that still used fusion drives? But the errors kept happening. Trade convoys that were supposed to travel directly between Earth and the outer colonies started taking strange detours through uncharted space. When questioned, human captains explained that they were avoiding solar storms, asteroid fields, or gravitational anomalies. Each excuse was perfectly reasonable and backed up by detailed sensor data. Confederation Overseer Dex Marley began noticing communication delays throughout human space. Messages that should have taken minutes to transmit were taking hours or sometimes days. When he brought this to Administrator Park's attention, he received a comprehensive technical briefing about solar interference patterns affecting human communication networks. "You see, Overseer," Park explained with charts and graphs. Our star is entering a period of increased activity. The electromagnetic radiation is interfering with our older communication satellites. We're upgrading our systems, but it's a slow process with our limited technology. Everything was documented. Every delay had an explanation. Every problem had a technical cause that made perfect sense for a primitive species struggling with advanced galactic technology. What the Confederation didn't realize was that behind this carefully maintained facade, humanity was executing the largest disappearing act in galactic history. Commander Bae Young-sik stood in the real control room of Lunar Base, watching his teams pack the last of the critical equipment. Above them, the decoy operation continued normally. Alien overseers visiting the base saw busy humans working on approved projects, never suspecting that they were looking at elaborate theater designed to hide the truth. Phase 3 complete, Bae reported into his encrypted communication device. All critical personnel and equipment relocated. Decoy operations maintaining normal appearance. The aliens still think we have 300 staff here, but we're down to 30 volunteers running the show. The volunteers were carefully chosen actors, military personnel trained to maintain the illusion that Lunar Base was operating at full capacity. They ran fake experiments, filed fake reports, and maintained fake schedules. The real scientists, engineers and researchers had vanished into the black projects scattered throughout the outer system. Similar operations were happening across human space. Mining stations reported normal output while secretly stockpiling resources in hidden facilities. Research laboratories published mundane papers while their best minds worked on classified projects in locations that didn't officially exist. Military bases appeared to follow Confederation oversight protocols while secretly developing technologies that violated everything the aliens thought they knew about human capabilities. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. Humans had learned something important from their first encounters with the Confederation. The aliens were arrogant. They expected primitive species to be incompetent, so when humans appeared incompetent, it confirmed their prejudices perfectly. Dr. Kim So-young, working from a hidden research facility in the asteroid belt, put it best during one of the encrypted briefings. They see what they expect to see. We're giving them a show of bumbling primitives who can barely manage their own technology, while our real work happens in places they don't even know exist. The Confederation noticed the reduction in contact and communication efficiency, but they attributed it to exactly what Administrator Park told them: human incompetence and primitive technology. Their own reports described humanity as struggling to adapt to galactic standards and requiring additional oversight due to systemic inefficiencies. The alien overseers never questioned why a species advanced enough to achieve interstellar travel would suddenly become so incompetent. They never wondered why humans who had impressed them with their creativity were now producing such boring, predictable results. They never suspected that the delays and errors weren't accidents. They were cover for the greatest disappearing act in galactic history. After all, what could a primitive species accomplish that would concern a galactic civilization? The answer to that question was being built in secret facilities across human space. And when it was ready, the Confederation would learn exactly what happens when you underestimate humanity. 18 months had passed since humanity began their carefully orchestrated withdrawal, and Confederation Intelligence Officer Krell Vask was starting to feel like he was chasing ghosts. He sat in his sterile office aboard the intelligence vessel Watchful Eye, staring at his latest report with growing frustration. This would be his third consecutive failure report, and he knew the Oversight Committee was losing patience with him. Krell Vask had been tracking alien species for over 2 centuries. He had monitored rebellions, investigated smuggling operations, and uncovered plots against the Confederation across dozens of star systems. He was good at his job, maybe the best the Confederation had, but humanity was making him feel like an amateur. "For the humans have gone effectively silent," he finally admitted to his recording device, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "Our surveillance craft encounter unexplained sensor anomalies and consistently lose tracking. Communication intercepts yield only routine commercial traffic. Shipping schedules, weather reports, entertainment broadcasts. Nothing of intelligence value. He paused, reviewing the data one more time before continuing. Human space appears empty, not abandoned but hollow, like we're looking at shadows instead of a real civilization. The briefing room aboard the Confederation flagship Supreme Authority was filled with the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Committee leader Zorthak, a massive creature with 6 arms and skin that shifted colors with his moods, dominated the center of the table. Around him sat representatives from the Confederation's most influential species, each one accustomed to having their every word treated as law. When Krelvask finished his report, Zorthak dismissed the concern with a casual wave of one of his arms. His skin had shifted to a pale blue color, the equivalent of boredom among his species. Primitive species often retreat when overwhelmed by superior civilization, he said with the confidence of someone who had seen this pattern dozens of times before. They sulk in their corners for a while, then they return when hunger and desperation drive them back to our protection. It's a predictable cycle. But even as Zorthak spoke those words, the reports kept coming in from across the galaxy, and these reports were starting to worry even the most arrogant Confederation officials. Trade Station Beta 9, located on the edge of human space, filed a routine incident report that should have been ignored. Station Commander Veltanos mentioned that his sensors had detected human ships passing through the area, but when his security teams tried to make contact, the ships simply vanished from all detection systems. Not cloaked, Veltanos specified in his report. Cloaked ships still leave trace signatures. These ships just stopped existing as far as our sensors were concerned. Similar reports came from monitoring posts throughout the region. Confederation vessels patrolling human territory reported strange energy signatures in sectors that their maps showed as empty space. The signatures didn't match any known technology, and they appeared and disappeared without warning or pattern. Captain Wolverine of the investigation fleet Dominion's Edge filed what would become the most disturbing report in Confederation files. His ship had been conducting routine surveillance near the Kepler Nebula when they detected a human vessel traveling at impossible speeds. We tracked the human ship using long-range sensors, Captain Wolverine reported to his superiors. Our scans showed it entering what appeared to be a massive artificial structure hidden within the nebula. The structure was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, but it didn't match any known human construction techniques. Wolverine's tactical officer had recommended immediate investigation. The Dominion's Edge was one of the Confederation's most advanced scout ships, equipped with sensors that could detect a paperclip from 3 star systems away. If there was something to find, they would find it. We approached the nebula at full stealth capability, Wolverine continued his report. Our sensors maintained lock on both the human vessel and the artificial structure until we reached the outer edge of the nebula. Then, without warning, both targets simply vanished from our sensors. The investigation team had spent 6 hours conducting detailed scans of the area. They found nothing. No structure, no human ship, no trace that anything had ever been there. Even the energy signatures that had led them to the nebula in the first place were gone. It wasn't sensor malfunction, Wolverine insisted in his report. Our equipment was functioning perfectly. We ran full diagnostics 3 times. Whatever we saw, it was real, and then it wasn't. The Oversight Committee read Wolverine's report with growing unease, but committee leader Zorthak made the final decision with characteristic arrogance. The report was archived as a sensor malfunction and classified at the lowest security level. But across Confederation space, similar reports were piling up. Ships that appeared and vanished, structures that existed one moment and were gone the next, energy signatures that defied known physics, human activity in places where humans weren't supposed to be able to survive. Intelligence Officer Krelvask collected every report, analyzed every anomaly, and reached a conclusion that terrified him. Humanity wasn't retreating or hiding. They were preparing. And whatever they were preparing for, it was something beyond anything the Confederation had ever encountered. In his private log, Krelvask wrote words that would prove prophetic. We may have made a serious mistake with the humans. I don't think they're as primitive as we assumed. I don't think they're primitive at all. But his warnings fell on deaf ears. After all, what could a species that still used fusion drives possibly do to threaten a galactic civilization, the Ancient? Wreckage floated in the darkness of the Arcturus deep, like a metallic graveyard. The ship, if you could still call it a ship, had been torn apart by weapons so powerful that they had left the metal twisted into impossible shapes. Parts of the hull seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, creating optical illusions that hurt to look at directly. Dr. Kelnashi had seen thousands of derelict vessels during her career as the Confederation's top xenoarchaeologist. She had studied the remains of civilizations that had risen and fallen across the galaxy, analyzed technologies that had been lost for millions of years, and pieced together the stories of species that existed only in ancient legends. This should have been just another routine salvage operation, but as her science vessel Truth Seeker approached the wreckage, Dr. Kelnashi knew immediately that this was different. The energy readings coming from the destroyed ship were unlike anything in her extensive database. Her instruments were picking up signatures that shouldn't exist, according to known physics. "Bring us in slowly," she instructed her pilot, "and keep all defensive systems online. I don't like the look of this." The first anomaly became apparent as soon as her team began their initial scans. The ship's energy conduits appeared to be shifting between different dimensional phases, existing in normal space one moment and sliding into parallel dimensions the next. Dr. Kelnashi had to recalibrate her sensors 3 times before she could get consistent readings. "This is impossible," she muttered, checking her instruments. Again. "These energy conduits are operating on principles that we've only theorized about. They're channeling power through dimensional barriers, like it's the most natural thing in the world." Her assistant, Velkaman, was running analysis on the hull materials with equally disturbing results. He was a young researcher, ambitious and eager to make his mark in xenoarchaeology. But what he was seeing made him question everything he thought he knew about advanced technology. "Doctor, these hull materials are existing in quantum superposition," he reported, his voice shaky with disbelief. "They're simultaneously in multiple states: solid, liquid, energy, and something else that our sensors can't even identify." The ship was essentially existing in several realities at once. Dr. Kelnashi moved to examine the weapon systems, and what she found there made her blood run cold. The remaining fragments of the ship's armaments showed evidence of technology that could manipulate matter at the subatomic level. These weren't just advanced weapons. They were reality-altering devices that could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics in localized areas. "Run a full metallurgy analysis," she ordered Velkaman. "I need to know what species built this thing." The analysis took hours, with their most advanced computers working to decode the construction techniques and materials used in the ship's creation. When the results finally came through, Velkaman ran the analysis 2 more times before he could bring himself to accept what he was seeing. "Doctor," he said quietly, "the construction techniques don't match any known species in our database. The mathematical principles underlying the design, the engineering approaches, even the aesthetic choices. None of it corresponds to any civilization we've catalogued." Dr. Kelnashi leaned over his shoulder to examine the data herself. Her centuries of experience allowed her to recognize patterns that younger researchers might miss. As she studied the mathematical equations embedded in the ship's design, a terrible realization began to form. "Wait," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I recognize these mathematical principles, the quantum mechanics theories, the dimensional physics calculations, the subatomic manipulation formulas." She pulled up her files on recently contacted species and began comparing the mathematical approaches. What she found confirmed her worst fears. "These are human equations," she said, her voice filled with dread, "but they're advanced far beyond anything we've seen from them. This technology is centuries ahead of what humanity demonstrated during first contact." Velkaman shook his head in denial. "That's impossible, Doctor. Humans are barely beyond fusion drives and kinetic projectiles. They're one of the most primitive species we've ever encountered." But the evidence was undeniable. The mathematical foundations, the engineering approaches, even the design philosophy all pointed to human origin. Someone had taken basic human scientific principles and developed them into technology that surpassed anything the Confederation possessed. "Dr. Kelnashi," ran one final analysis, the one she had been dreading most. She needed to know how old this wreckage was. If this was some ancient human civilization from millennia ago, that would be one thing. But if it was recent, the dating analysis results appeared on her screen, and Dr. Kelnashi felt her world collapse around her. The wreckage was less than 6 months old. This wasn't ancient technology from a forgotten human civilization. This was modern human engineering, developed and deployed within the last year. "Welcome," she said quietly. "We need to contact Confederation Command immediately, and we need to do it on the highest priority emergency channel." "What should I tell them, Doctor?" Dr. Kelnashi looked back at the impossible wreckage floating in space, technology that violated everything the Confederation thought they knew about human capabilities. "Tell them that we may have made a catastrophic error in our assessment of humanity," she said, "and tell them that if humans can build ships like this, then everything we thought we knew about this species is wrong." The implications were terrifying. If humans had been hiding this level of technological advancement, what else were they hiding? And more importantly, what were they planning to do with weapons that could rewrite reality itself? The planet Kethmore had been the Confederation's pride and joy for over 3 centuries. It wasn't just another military outpost or research station. It was a symbol of their civilizing mission across the galaxy. The Cultural Correction Facility housed 12 different species that the Confederation had deemed insufficiently advanced for proper galactic society. The facility was massive, covering 3 continents with re-education centers, research installations, and military barracks. 70,000 Confederation personnel worked there, from scientists studying primitive cultures to guards maintaining order among the subject populations. The planet buzzed with activity 24 hours a day as the Confederation worked to reshape entire civilizations according to their vision of proper galactic citizenship. On a Tuesday morning, all of that simply stopped existing. The first sign that something was wrong came when the daily status report from Kethmore failed to arrive at Confederation Command. This wasn't unusual. Communication delays happened all the time across such vast distances. But when 12 hours passed without any contact, administrators began to worry. The investigation fleet that arrived 3 days later found something that defied explanation. The planet Kethmore was still there, still orbiting its star, still supporting life. But every single Confederation structure had been transformed into perfect circles of what looked like crystallized glass. Commander Yelthane led the first landing party, and his report would become one of the most disturbing documents in Confederation history. The correction facilities, the research labs, the military compounds, all of them have been reduced to these perfect geometric shapes, he reported back to his ship. No explosion damage, no weapon signatures, no debris field. Just these glass circles where our buildings used to be. The circles weren't random. Each one was exactly where a Confederation structure had stood, perfectly preserving the footprint of the original building. The glass was smooth and flawless, reflecting the sky like mirrors. When the investigation team tried to analyze the material, their instruments gave impossible readings. The glass seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, but the most disturbing discovery was what wasn't there. 70,000 Confederation personnel had been stationed on Kethmore. Soldiers, scientists, administrators, support staff, all of them had vanished without a trace. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no indication of what had happened to them. They had simply ceased to exist along with their buildings. The planet's native populations had vanished as well, but long-range sensors soon revealed where they had gone. 2 sectors away, on a world that Confederation maps had listed as uninhabitable, the missing populations were alive and thriving. Somehow overnight, they had been relocated to a paradise planet complete with cities, farms, and infrastructure that hadn't existed a week before. The only message left behind was carved into the face of Mount Kethmore, the planet's highest peak. The message was written in 47 different languages, every language spoken by the species that had been held in the correction facility. They were not the ones who needed correction. The words were carved deep into the mountain stone, each letter 10 meters tall and perfectly formed. The message could be seen from orbit, a clear statement visible to anyone who approached the planet. Fleet Admiral Torgesh arrived with the Retribution battle group, 12 of the Confederation's most powerful warships, expecting to find evidence of a massive military assault. Instead, he found himself facing something that challenged everything he understood about warfare. As his fleet approached Kethmore, his sensors began picking up impossible readings. Ships were appearing around his formation, human ships based on their energy signatures, but they weren't behaving like normal vessels. They seemed to exist in multiple locations at once, phasing in and out of normal space like ghosts made of metal and energy. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported with barely controlled panic, "I'm reading human vessels surrounding our formation, but our targeting computers can't lock onto them. They're there, not there, and somehow both at the same time." Admiral Torgesh had commanded fleets for over 2 centuries. He had fought in the Confederation's greatest battles, had seen weapons that could crack planets and shields that could deflect stars, but he had never seen anything like this. The human ships were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Their hulls seemed to be made of the same crystallized material that had replaced the Confederation buildings, reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. They moved through space in ways that violated known physics, changing direction without showing any signs of propulsion, accelerating to impossible speeds without creating energy signatures. A single transmission reached his flagship, delivered, in perfect Confederation standard, but with an accent he had never heard before. "Fleet Admiral Torgesh of the Confederation vessel Retribution," the voice said with polite formality, "you are trespassing in sovereign human space. Withdraw your forces immediately." The Admiral looked at his tactical display, showing his powerful fleet surrounded by ships that shouldn't exist, commanded by a species he had dismissed as primitive just months before. "Unknown human vessel," he replied, trying to maintain his authority. "This is Confederation space. You have committed an act of war against galactic civilization." The response came immediately, and this time the politeness was gone. "Admiral, this is Commander Park Minho of the Terran Defense Force. What happened on Kethmore was not an act of war. It was a correction. The beings you imprisoned have been relocated to safety. Your personnel have been removed from service. No one was harmed, but this facility will never operate again." Admiral Torgesh felt a chill run down his spine as he realized he was looking at the future of galactic warfare, and humanity had just announced that the rules had changed forever. News of what happened at Kethmore spread across Confederation space like wildfire. Within hours, every major world was buzzing with rumors about the mysterious attack. Some called it impossible. Others whispered that it was the beginning of the end. But everyone wanted to know the same thing. What were humans really capable of? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. Admiral Song Min Ho stood on the bridge of the Indomitable Dawn, humanity's flagship, watching through the main view screen as Confederation fleets across the galaxy slowly realized just how helpless they had become. The ship itself was a marvel that would have been considered pure fantasy just 2 years earlier. Its hull seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, and sections of it appeared to exist in parallel dimensions, creating an optical effect that was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. Around him, holographic displays showed the locations of human vessels throughout known space. What the Confederation was seeing defied everything they thought they understood about military logistics. Hundreds of human ships were emerging from what appeared to be empty space, materializing near every major Confederation installation simultaneously. "All stations report ready," Commander Yu Yunji announced from her position at the tactical console. Her voice was calm and professional, but there was an undertone of excitement that she couldn't quite hide. "Dimensional phase drives online. Quantum disruption fields active. Matter reconstruction arrays armed and standing by." The words would have sounded like science fiction to human ears just 3 years ago. But humanity had accomplished something that no other species in galactic history had managed. They had learned from the mistakes of everyone who came before them. The technology hadn't been invented from scratch. It had been excavated piece by piece, from the graveyards of civilizations that the Confederation had destroyed centuries or even millennia ago. While the arrogant aliens dismissed ancient battlefields as archaeological curiosities with no military value, human teams had spent 2 years of apparent silence systematically exploring every ruin, every derelict ship, every forgotten battlefield. They could find that Dr. Kim Sung-min had led the xenoarchaeology teams that made the crucial discoveries. She was a small woman with an intense passion for understanding how ancient civilizations had lived and died. What she found in those ruins changed everything humanity thought they knew about galactic history. The species the Confederation conquered weren't primitive, she had reported to the secret council coordinating humanity's transformation. They were sophisticated, advanced civilizations with technology that in many cases exceeded what the Confederation has today. But they were tired. They had been fighting this same battle for thousands of years. The pattern became clear as human teams explored more and more archaeological sites. The Confederation didn't just conquer primitive species and guide them toward civilization. They actively sought out and destroyed any species that showed signs of becoming competitive threats. Any civilization that developed technology beyond a certain level, any species that showed too much independence or creativity, any culture that refused to submit completely, they were all systematically eliminated. The Confederation has been culling potential rivals for millions of years, Dr. Kim had explained. Every time a species got close to matching their capabilities, they were destroyed and their worlds were turned into cautionary tales. The galaxy isn't full of primitive species, because most species are primitive. It's because the advanced ones have been eliminated. But those eliminated species had left behind something precious: knowledge. Hidden in their ruins were the blueprints for weapons that could manipulate matter at the quantum level, defensive systems that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and propulsion technology that treated the laws of physics more like polite suggestions than absolute rules. The breakthrough came when human scientists realized that they didn't need to understand how the ancient technology worked. They just needed to understand how to use it. Species after species had left behind detailed instructions, desperate final messages to whoever might find them, explaining how to build weapons capable of challenging the Confederation's dominance. It's like they were all waiting for someone to finally put the pieces together, Dr. Kim had said. Every ruin we explored had more pieces of the puzzle. The Vorthak had perfected dimensional phase technology. The Kalani had developed matter reconstruction systems. The Zephyrians had created quantum disruption fields. Individually, none of them could stand against the Confederation, but together, they had created a technological inheritance that humanity was now claiming. The human ships emerging across the galaxy weren't just advanced, they were revolutionary. They combined the best discoveries of dozens of extinct civilizations into weapons and defenses that made the Confederation's most powerful vessels look like ancient relics. Admiral Song Min-ho watched as Confederation fleets tried desperately to respond to the sudden appearance of human forces throughout their territory. Their most advanced sensors couldn't get accurate readings on the human ships. Their most powerful weapons couldn't achieve target lock. Their fastest vessels looked motionless compared to ships that could step between dimensions like crossing a street. "Sir," Commander Yu reported, "we're receiving surrender requests from 17 Confederation battle groups. They're asking for terms." The Admiral nodded grimly. He took no pleasure in what was happening, but humanity had learned a crucial lesson from studying all those ruined civilizations. When you found yourself facing a galactic empire that specialized in eliminating potential rivals, you had exactly one chance to prove that you were too dangerous to eliminate. "Open a channel to all Confederation forces," he ordered. "It's time to explain the new rules of galactic civilization." The competition that the Confederation had worked so hard to eliminate had finally returned, wearing human faces and carrying the accumulated wisdom of every civilization they had destroyed. And this time, the outcome was going to be very different. Vannax. Confederation's surrender didn't come with dramatic space battles or heroic last stands. It came with a simple, crushing realization that spread through their command structure like a virus. Their entire military had become as obsolete as stone tools in the space age. Across the galaxy, Confederation fleets that had once struck fear into the hearts of entire civilizations found themselves surrounded by human vessels that operated on principles they couldn't understand. Weapons that had conquered 1,000 worlds couldn't achieve target lock on ships that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Shields that had deflected planet-killing asteroids were useless against weapons that bypassed physical matter entirely. The final meeting took place aboard the human vessel Eternal Harmony, and even its name was a calculated insult. The ship existed in 11 dimensions at once, its corridors and chambers stretching through realities that the alien delegates couldn't fully perceive. Walking through it felt like moving through a dream where the laws of physics had decided to take a vacation. Admiral Lee Soo-jin presided over the proceedings with the same polite, formal courtesy that humanity had maintained throughout their original humiliation 2 years earlier. She wore a simple black uniform with no decorations or symbols of rank. She didn't need them. The power she represented was evident in every impossible angle of the ship around them. Sitting across from her were the same alien officials who had once laughed at humanity's primitive technology. Committee leader Zor Thak, whose skin had shifted to the pale grey color that indicated fear among his species. Administrator Yelgoth, whose hands trembled as he tried to maintain his composure. Captain Vexton, who had delivered the first insulting speech to humanity, now couldn't meet Admiral Lee's eyes. Honorable delegates of the former Galactic Confederation, Admiral Lee began, her voice carrying the same diplomatic formality they had once mocked. We gather today to discuss the transition of galactic governance to a more equitable system. The word former hit the alien delegates like a physical blow. In less than a week, humanity had dismantled a galactic empire that had stood for millions of years, not through conquest or destruction, but by simply making it irrelevant. The Galactic Confederation's services are no longer required, Admiral Lee announced with polite finality. Species previously under your protection have been contacted and offered alternative arrangements based on mutual respect and cooperation. Many have already accepted our proposals for defensive alliances and trade partnerships. Committee leader Zorthak found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. What about our homeworlds, our populations? Will you do to us what we did to others? Admiral Lee's expression softened slightly, showing a mercy that the Confederation had never offered to their conquered enemies. Your homeworlds will not be harmed. Your people will not be enslaved or relocated. Your cultures will not be forcibly modified. Consider this a cultural correction. We're correcting your understanding of how civilized species should treat each other. The irony was not lost on anyone in the room. The Confederation had spent centuries forcing cultural corrections on species they deemed primitive. Now they were receiving their own correction from the species they had considered most primitive of all. Prime Minister Seo Jae-won stepped forward to deliver the final terms. He represented the emerging Terran Alliance, a coalition of species that had chosen to ally with humanity rather than continue under Confederation rule. The alliance had grown from 0 to over 50 member species in just 1 week, as word spread about humanity's offer of genuine partnership rather than domination. The galaxy will be reorganized under new principles, Prime Minister Seo announced. Voluntary association rather than forced submission. Mutual benefit rather than one-sided exploitation. Any species that prefers isolation will have that preference. Respected. Any species that attempts to recreate the old system of dominance will be corrected. That last word carried unmistakable weight. The delegates had seen what human correction looked like at Kethmore. Perfect, precise, and absolutely final. As the meeting concluded, human ships throughout the galaxy began implementing the new order. Freed species were offered protection, technology, and trade opportunities. Confederation military installations were peacefully dismantled, their personnel given the choice to return home or join the new galactic community as equals rather than overlords. The transformation was swift and comprehensive. Within months, the old hierarchy that had placed species in rigid castes was replaced by a loose confederation based on mutual respect. Trade flowed more freely. Scientific knowledge was shared openly, and for the first time in galactic history, species were encouraged to develop their unique potentials rather than conform to a single standard. The former masters of the galaxy found themselves in the strange position of being just another species among equals. Some adapted well to the new reality. Others struggled with the loss of their privileged status. But all of them learned a lesson that echoed through the new galactic order. The final transmission from Earth to the disbanded Confederation was delivered by Ambassador Kim Tae-ho, the same man who had endured their initial mockery. His message was simple, direct, and unforgettable. Mocking humanity was your first mistake. Cutting ties was our only warning. There will not be a third. In the end, the species that had dismissed humanity as primitive learned that sometimes the most dangerous civilizations are the ones that choose to be underestimated. They had looked at human fusion drives and kinetic weapons and seen primitives barely beyond throwing rocks. They never bothered to ask what humans might accomplish if they stopped throwing rocks and started thinking instead. The galaxy had a new order now, and it was built on a foundation the Confederation had never understood. The principle that true strength comes not from dominating others, but from lifting them up alongside you.